This is the podcast that we ask our guests from in front and behind the camera, how did they get their foot in the door? What was the key to unlocking their success? What's their story?
Our guest today is a 5-time Emmy-nominated actress who started her career playing a young Bette Midler in Beaches. Shortly after, she went on to star in her own TV show, Blossom, but you'll probably know her best for the hit TV show, The Big Bang Theory. Join us as we chat about the pressures of being a child star, taking a break from acting to study her PhD in neuroscience, to have her return in acting, playing a scientist, and her latest project, the fascinating documentary, Mum and Dad's Nipple Factory. Our guest today is actor, writer, director and producer, Mayim Bialik. First off, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat. And when I saw the title of this documentary, I was like, I just don't know what this is going to be about. Like, maybe is this a funny title for a thing, or is it actually about this? But what a fantastic documentary, and what a wonderful, heartwarming story, and so many characters in that family as well. But yeah, I'd love to really go into depth with that. But before we talk about the documentary itself, I'd love to ask you, my podcast is usually about, how actors, producers, directors, how people get into the industry and how they start their career. And I'd love to know how that love of performance and now obviously you've branched off and done directing and producing. How did that all begin, and where did that start for you?
I grew up in a house that was not an industry house. And although I started acting when I was 11, the traditional trajectory for child actors is often being in commercials and starting when you're a toddler and kind of being, really conditioned in the industry that way. I didn't have that. I just had my crazy family to deal with until I was 11 and then entered the crazy world of the industry. But, I'm a second generation American. So my parents were born during World War II to Eastern European immigrants. And, I grew up in kind of a poor neighborhood in Hollywood. I didn't think I should have my own TV show. Those things didn't happen, and when you think about what television looked like, in the 80s, when I was growing up, I did not look like what they called all American, which is really what casting wanted. They wanted an all, which sounds ridiculous to say now, because what does an American look like? But in the 70s and 80s, the television look was all American. It meant blonde hair, blue eyes, and small features. And I did have blonde hair and blue eyes, but I don't have small features. And so, it was really, my career has been buoyed by people who believed in me more than I believed in myself. And my mom she was the nursery school director at the synagogue I grew up at, and she finished that job. And she's like, if you really think that you want to be an actress, let's give it a shot. I had no idea. I knew that I liked performing in school plays. And, I like to say there's two kinds of actors. There's actors who do it really for the applause and because they want that praise, and possibly because they don't feel good enough and they want other people to help them feel good. And then there's the other kind of actor who does what we do because we want other people to feel good and to feel like something's right. And to me, those are really, you can divide actors, I think, in those two categories: those who do it for the applause and those who do it because they want to know that they're okay, because you're okay. So I always say, my favorite thing to hear as a performer is moving on. Right? You get the take and the director says, we're moving on. And that means I did it right. It doesn't mean that I'm good, because I still will always believe that I'm a horrible person, right? Because that's just the actor's disease. But I really enjoyed performing. I felt very comfortable on stage. I had a really wonderful drama teacher, Julie Drake, when I was, I went to public school my whole life, and she was incredible. She was very stern. She was also our English teacher. And I just really loved making people laugh. I loved doing funny voices and, I'd imitate the other kids, I think with some level of good-heartedness. But yeah, that's kind of how I started. And, back in 1986, my parents opened a Yellow Pages, which most people don't even know what that is. But they opened the Yellow Pages and looked up child actor agents. That was a category. And my dad just took a picture in our backyard, just a little headshot, because we didn't have money for a photographer. And my parents typed a letter on a typewriter saying, our daughter looks like Bette Midler and Barbara Streisand, and we think you should meet with her. And that's literally how I met with agents. And I picked one who was in charge of some really important careers. She was Neil Patrick Harris's agent and Johnny Galecki's agent and Stephen Dorff's agent. And, a lot of us kind of Mario Lopez, like a lot of us grew out of that agency. Her name was Bo Shoot. And that was my first agent when I was 11. And then I was cast in Beaches a year later playing Bette Midler. And my mother was like, see, I told you. And I was like, I'm not a redhead. I'm never going to get this part. And they just kept calling me back. And Beaches came out when I was 13. And then I got, my own series a year after that.
Yeah, wow. So really off to the races. Like it felt like it was pretty quick. And did you kind of at that age, did you realize that that was like a kind of a lightning strike there, or did it feel like, okay, this may not stay around? What were you aware of at that age?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at that age, I didn't really understand. Like, I didn't really understand the movie like was gonna like come out in a theater. Like, of course, I knew Bette Midler was like a big movie star, and but it didn't really occur to me. Like, I didn't really get it. I didn't understand that like my family in Israel would get to watch me on a screen before they even got to meet me in person. Like, I didn't understand that this was going to be like a movie like that. And then like getting your own TV show, it's like a thing of like it's pretend. I mean, like it felt fake, it felt so unreal to me. And my dad, in particular, was very much like, this could all disappear. Like, don't get too comfortable. So I was kind of raised like always like looking over my shoulder. But no, it's pretty bizarre. Like it felt bizarre. And I think because I was that other kind of actor, like it never felt secure. It never felt like, well, of course, like of course I got my own show. Like I'm so funny and amazing. Like I never felt like that. And then, with Blossom, I was 14 to 19, which are, just like really hard years just to exist as a human. And, I got to live that out, honestly, on a really lovely set. There was no drugs or alcohol. Like it was a very clean set. We got to work with some incredible people, and we had a lot of musicians come on, and we got to meet BB King, and like just all these amazing things happened. So it was a pretty positive experience, even though it still really freaked me out. I think that's part of why I left the industry for a bit. I just wanted to sort of like have a normal life where you're not always like performing and having auditions and things.
Well, that's crazy because at that age as well, you were on that show for, years, and that's such a huge chunk of your life at that age. So it must, yeah, as you say, it's a difficult transition. You're kind of growing into a woman, and that must have all been a little bit too much. And I guess that why you took the time off for a bit? And
Yeah, I mean, I think I took the time off because, as I mentioned, my grandparents were immigrants, and I was really taught that you go to college no matter what. My brother had gone to UCLA and had a very positive experience there, and he was a journalism student, and he worked on the school paper. And like, I wanted that, that American dream of like going to school. And I had fallen in love with science, as a high schooler. And so I really wanted to pursue that. And I was ready to not be working in an adult world, which is really what Hollywood is when you're a kid. It's an adult industry, not that kind of adult industry, but it's an industry of grown-ups, living by grown-up rules, which in many cases is the rules of like lying and, manipulating. And those weren't skills that I wanted to keep acquiring.
that's amazing though that you went off and you did that, and you went to UCLA, and the fact you got a PhD, and to go off and do something completely different. Because as you said, there's different kinds of actors. There aren't many that can go off and do something like that on the side, and so your PhD, that was in.
It was in neuroscience. That's the brain and nervous system.
Because I'm dyslexic, and I went to a school, people had OCD, they had all kinds of learning difficulties. Where did that interest of that come from? Is it something that close to you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I specifically got interested in science, in high school. Generally speaking, I was really interested in biology, and I thought I would study like nurture versus nature. That's what we called it back then, to study what environmental impacts were versus, sort of genotypic, impacts on behavior. But my parents had always, my dad in particular was a drama teacher, and he always worked with kids with special needs. He would always go to the special ed classes and say like, does anyone want to be in my play? And, so I grew up seeing plays with kids signing their lines, kids in wheelchairs who were, virtually nonverbal signing their lines. Like I just, always had, I was raised with a real, kind of sense of compassion for the different ways people are. And so as a neuroscience student, I'm a vegan, so I didn't want to research animals. So there are only a certain number of labs that research humans if you don't want to work with animals. And so one of the labs was a lab specializing in Prader-Willi syndrome, which is the syndrome I studied. And they also studied Down syndrome and Williams syndrome and all sorts of different syndromes of developmental differences. And so I ended up studying obsessive compulsive disorder in this population of individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. I happen to be a person with obsessive compulsive disorder, but that's not why I studied it. I think it's, a lot more people have it than, even we talked about then. And I like to joke, I didn't really call it obsessive compulsive disorder. I didn't know what that was my whole life. And I once had a psychiatrist say, "Do you have a favorite number?" And I said, "Well, I have several. Doesn't everyone?" He was like, "Not really." So then he's like, "Well, tell me about your favorite numbers." And I was like, "Well, how much time do you have? I could talk forever about my favorite numbers." So anyway, part of my OCD spectrum is a particular affinity for counting and numbers and things. But anyway, that's not why I studied it, but it did happen to be a very comfortable fit, to study. And I worked in neuropsychiatry, and that's sort of where my training was.
That's fascinating. And you've got a podcast, and a lot of people are obviously aware of this, but it's kind of, you talk a lot about mental health, you talk about, all these things, and it's lovely to see that you've carried that on and being able to do all of that while you've been in the acting and all these other things. And I've just seen your podcast for the first time, and I'm now going through the episodes going, oh great, I've got a load of episodes to listen to. But that must be fun as well when you get to, chat to all kinds of people about, all kinds of mental health and how is that something that just kind of came naturally? Was that like how did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of comes as an extension of my, my science background. And obviously I was on The Big Bang Theory playing a scientist for, a decade of my life, pretty much. So, no, it was actually really when COVID started, and my partner, Jonathan Cohen, who's, on the podcast with me, we both realized that our, anxiety really spiked, and, especially anticipatory anxiety, like, people, I think a lot of us forgot, but I don't forget. Like in the early days, we were like, what is happening? What's going to happen? Are we all going to die? Like, who do we trust? Do we trust this government source? Do we trust that? Like, what's the president say? It was very confusing. And Jonathan and I realized that, we were people who had access to mental health care. I had been practically raised in a therapist's office, and still we were freaking out. And we said, gosh, what about people who don't have that background, who don't have the resources to go to therapy or to go to psychiatrist and find out what's going on? So we started the podcast really as a way to kind of democratize mental health. Like, it's a human right to know what anxiety is. What does it do to your appetite? What does it do to your sleep? What's the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack? What's depression versus what's grief, right? So we kind of started just as like providing information, and then we started talking to people, and a lot of them were celebrities, a lot of them were experts in the field. And what a lot of people revealed is that even at the height of their career, the height of their success, the height of their fame, there still was this notion of imposter syndrome, or trauma that they had never dealt with, or abuse that they hadn't talked about, or they turned to drugs and alcohol, or they turned to work as an addiction. And all this stuff just like kept coming up over and over. And the more people we spoke to, the more the podcast kind of evolved into understanding, what's general well-being, and what do we have a right to know as people, even if we don't have access to, all the specialists and things like that. So I think I'm one of the only non-MDs, who has a show that ranks in the Apple, top 20, podcasts in like health and lifestyle. I mean, I have a PhD, but that's not, what I'm necessarily using a lot of this for.
It though. That makes it legit.
No, but it's different because we're not dispensing medical advice. We're talking to, in many cases, prominent. I mean, we had Ben Stiller on, we've had Dustin Hoffman, we had Matthew McConaughey, we've had Chelsea Handler and Sarah Silverman and Eliza Schlesinger, and like, we've also had, Gabor Mate and Peter Attia and, Andrew Huberman, like people who are at the top of their fields in understanding this stuff, talking about their own addictions, their own traumas. And it's fascinating because, kind of circles around to a lot of the same stuff, like, ego stuff and transcendental experiences, and the intersection of science and spirituality is sort of Jonathan and my sweet spot.
I felt, because as soon as I knew that you were going to come on here, I wanted to check it out. And obviously you saw, I was like, you have a podcast. Great. I'll get some tips.
Oh, and it's called Mayim Bialik Breakdown. We should say that. I forgot to
Yes,
say that.
yes.
Also, we videotape it, so it's on YouTube on my YouTube channel also.
I listened to the Matthew McConaughey episode and I'd read his book Green Lights, and so it was a really nice insight because having read the book, like I knew the stories you were talking about, but then he was going into more detail about it and be like, well, this is kind of why this happened. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to listen to all of them now. There's hundreds of episodes, so I've got a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, and the Ben Stiller one is also, I think, really, really interesting. And I just really respect him as a filmmaker, not just as a
Yeah.
comedian. But anyway, it was just like really incredible to get to speak to him and like pick at his brain and find out, we all have a story of how we got here. Like, and I'm just really interested in that.
Mm-mm. Oh, definitely. I mean, I feel like when I listen to a podcast of that level and it, I mean, I don't know because I'm familiar with you and that kind of adds something, but like the fact that you're talking to these people, like, obviously Matthew McConaughey, but then bringing out these things that you just think, oh, it's such an, it's a personal thing. There's moments you think, oh, well, I would have never known that. That's what I try and, that's what I try and emulate on here. So I was taking notes. But yeah, I'll be listening to the rest of them for sure. But in terms of, you've talked about there the kind of very start of your career and, being a child actor and moving up and obviously getting your own show. But then, something like The Big Bang Theory, a show that is so colossally huge across the world. That a moment that really kind of was that a real game changer? I'm guessing it probably was, but
Yeah, I mean, I had left the industry. So after Blossom, I left the industry for 12 years. I did my undergraduate degree in neuroscience and a minor in Hebrew and Jewish studies. And I got married. And in grad school, I actually had my first son in grad school. He's now 18. And then I took my doctoral hood, pregnant with my second son, who's 16. So, in the time that I left the industry, I did a couple episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm, like before I had kids. And then I did what not to wear, did like a makeover of me. But, I was really out of the industry, like really, really out of the industry. And so, I had a toddler and an infant when I started auditioning for things again. And the reason was because, God bless America for all sorts of reasons. Healthcare is not, one of them that we had really mastered in these years that I was trying to have insurance for, myself and my children. So I went back to acting because I figured like if I could just get, a couple jobs, like my SAG insurance will come back. I was not earning enough to have SAG insurance at that time. And so I just started auditioning, but I hadn't been watching TV. I didn't know what The Big Bang Theory was. It sounded like a game show to me because someone had mentioned like, oh, they mentioned you on it. And I was like, oh, it must be like a quiz show or something. I had no idea. So, being cast in The Big Bang Theory was also, a really different time of life. Like it was a different time of life for me because I had kids. And so I was like, I'm happy to be working at all. And it was a different kind of show. I wasn't the star. I didn't have to be in every scene. I didn't have to carry it. Like I could just like slide in and enjoy all the incredible work that our writers had done and our cast had done. And, I was made a regular in the fourth season. Melissa Rauch and I were both made regulars. She played Bernadette. And so, it was like a different place of, I don't want to say that I wasn't grateful when I was on Blossom, but it was a lot of anxiety surrounding the success of the show and the pressure and what it meant. This was like, I can't mess this up because I didn't create it. Like, this is just fun. Meaning it's not going to be on one person to like mess things up. Like there's a full ensemble. And so yeah, being made a regular was wild. I thought I was going to be let go that week. I thought like, oh, they don't have any more plots. Like they're done with me. And then they made me and Melissa, regulars, and then we, stayed for the whole run. So it was just a very different kind of place to be, a different element of publicity, like the publicity machine and social media existed now. And I was part of that show during the Me Too movement. Like, we would have conversations of like, oh my gosh, did you see what happened in the news yesterday? Like I was at Big Bang during such an interesting time in our culture, So it was interesting personally, but also interesting in the scope of how the industry, kind of kept shifting and adjusting. And yeah, it was wild. It was a wild time and a really, again, like a really positive experience. You know, I've been very, very lucky to be on sets where I felt like I was at home. You know, I felt like I had people that understood me, and really, really enjoyed working with our writers in particular.
Mm. Well, that's amazing to hear. I always worry. I'm an actor myself, and I always worry about the idea of, things outside the industry. Having kids and all these other things that are more important, really. But you kind of pin so much on your career. But it's so great to hear that you went off, had a break, you had kids, you lived. You had your life, and
Right.
then you came back and just like blew it out of the park. Which I mean, that's amazing. And in terms of starting your own production company, Sad Clown and things like that, and directing, all these things came later. Directing is very different obviously from acting, producing and things like that. Part of creation is it's a little bit deeper than just the acting. What was the reason
Yeah.
for going into things behind the scenes?
Yeah, so my father died about 10 years ago, and I was on Big Bang Theory when he passed away. And I felt a compulsion to write in a way that I had never felt a compulsion to write before. And it was that like memories were coming and images and like things, and I was like, oh, my brain wants to process this in a very interesting way. Like I'm seeing images and like what is happening? I'd never written a script. I didn't even have whatever the program is that you write in, like a final draft. I didn't even have it. Like I didn't know what that was. So I just started writing. I started by writing in prose, and then I converted it, to a script. And it never occurred to me that I would direct. So I started looking at directors. And I realized I was going to be explaining to people much younger than me with a very different life experience, which doesn't mean that they can't be fantastic directors, but I just realized like I'm going to be explaining things that already are in my head. Like I
Mm.
already saw them when I wrote it. And I ended up directing it, and it was really I mean, I think directing was my favorite thing because it combined all of the things that I love about being an actor,
Mm.
with a whole nother aspect of things that you don't get as an actor. And that is being in control of a lot of things. And I don't just mean being in control of people, but like, you get to make decisions about what people wear. Like, what do you want the look to be? What do you want the color to be? What do you want the mood to be? What's the soundtrack? If you were to design the soundtrack so that your, DP can understand, like what does the cinematography mean in relation to this story? Like that was like a level of like, oh my gosh, like this is what all my critical eye, like all those things, like that's what it seems like it was to
Mm.
direct. And I really, really, I enjoyed shot listing. Like I just enjoyed all of that stuff. Um, I didn't go to film school, but I think it was actually my ex-husband who was like, yeah, but if you were a dude, you wouldn't even second guess it. You'd be like, I haven't gone to film school and I'm going to make an amazing movie. And I was like, you're right. Like it was being a woman that I felt like, oh, I'm not prepared and I'm not this and I'm not that enough. And like then you hear all these like kids right out of film school or even out of undergrad who are like, I'm going to make a movie. And I was like, I guess I could just do that. And making a movie with, a little over $3 million is very, very difficult because they say you either have like $300 million or $3. That's the best way to make a movie. Everything in the middle gets very fuzzy.
Yeah, I mean, it's we've had so many guests on here that talk about making independent movies, and it's just a shit show from the start
It's
to finish.
really, really rough. I mean, I was just in a Jim Jarmusch movie, which, I was very glad and comforted to see that Jim Jarmusch still has to deal with a lot of the same things that I was dealing with, and he's Jim Jarmusch. So
It's still, yeah. I mean, there's always that element of it can all go wrong at any moment. But your movie, As They Made Us, and that cast is incredible. But I mean, working with someone like Dustin Hoffman and suddenly being like, yeah, you've got to direct Dustin Hoffman. What
that was crazy.
what was that like?
Well, yeah, I mean, I should say I wrote it during Big Bang Theory, and I, in my mind, cast Simon Helberg, to play the brother role, and then Diana Agron plays the sister. But yeah, the parents are Dustin Hoffman and Candice Bergen, like two like very fancy official people. Um, Dustin hadn't worked in a while, and he was really eager to work. And when I met with him, he didn't really know who I was, which was fine. Um, but he didn't realize I was like a first time writer. And of course he may have just been like flattering me because whatever, but he was like, I was really, really moved by this script. And yeah, I was very intimidated to direct Dustin Hoffman, but he really I mean, a lot of our crew took the job because they wanted to watch him work. And it really is, he would come to the set every single morning to say hello to everybody, like with his like cup of tea or whatever he was, his coffee or his tea, just to look around and see what are we doing today. And then he would go, get into his, hair and makeup and wardrobe, and then he'd come back. But like watching him work, it was like a master class. Watching him and Simon Helberg, there's one scene between the two of them, and I literally we let it run on I let it run on a loop. I didn't cut, and I let them keep kind of looping back on the conversation, and it was just like watching a master class in acting. So that was incredible. And Simon had always wanted to work with Dustin, and so just like seeing the two of them together was amazing. And Candice Bergen also, so really, really a very difficult film, a very difficult role for her. And seeing her and Dustin together was very sweet. They grew up together, but had never like been in this kind of relationship on camera together.
Now for a quick break. We'll be back to the episode shortly.
Check out the Patreon at patreon.com/lifeinfilm, where you'll get episodes early and uncut, amongst other treats. And don't forget to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy this episode, please leave us a positive rating. Add us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok at Life in Film Pod, and find our video episodes on YouTube by searching Elliot James Langridge Life in Film. Essentially, please like and subscribe everything. It makes a huge difference. Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by Betterhelp. Do you work in the film industry? Are you freelance? Or perhaps you have a 9-to-5? No matter what you do, mental health affects us all. I struggled early on in my career with the uncertainty of if and when I would ever work again, struggling to pay my bills, or simply with anxiety. Don't know about you, but being an actor, it's very important for me to maintain structure in the downtimes, and I found not only exercise, but talking to someone, for me, was a game changer. And so Life in Film has partnered with Betterhelp to provide you with access to the largest online therapy service in the world. And it can all be done from the comfort of your own home, from a phone, tablet or laptop. No commute, cutting down travel costs, and most importantly, it's affordable. With over 1,000 therapists in the UK, Betterhelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise in mental health. If you need someone to talk to and you're thinking of giving therapy a go, Betterhelp is a great option. And being a listener of the podcast, you get 10% off. That's 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lifeinfilm. That's betterhelp.com/lifeinfilm.
And back to the show.
I remember him approaching me and saying, I have some questions for you, but it's not related to my teeth. And it's like, okay. I never thought he would use this for that.
It's not known throughout the church at all.
They wouldn't believe you.
We don't bring it up.
Right.
So that was my mom and dad. Before I tell you about my parents' secret room full of nipples, let me tell you a little bit more about them. What were your first impressions of Dad?
Not quite cool enough,
That's right.
She was a hippie. You know how they say opposites attract.
My dad was an entrepreneur.
Peter, business stuff on it.
Mom is always there helping him with his other business ventures.
Hello.
To say we grew up conservative was definitely an understatement.
Well, we're all rich, aren't we? We're rich in the Lord.
He catches the one kiss of the episode, and the show is now banned.
As parents and as business partners, they were inseparable.
The phone rang and it was a doctor telling me the results came back cancer and you'll have to have surgery within the next couple of weeks. It does feel strange, even after I had my breast reconstruction, to look in the mirror and just see one nipple. It was just a constant reminder of what cancer had taken from us.
There is no good way to reconstruct the nipple.
And I said, well, can I figure this out?
There was just all of these like swatches and swabs.
It was like very clear he just like didn't want us in there.
Brian's personality is one not to accept the status quo.
The doctor saw that and was pretty impressed.
He was amazed.
Wow! There's clearly a need out there. And they jumped into it.
A lot of us don't know as much about this business as we should.
Because your mom and dad, when I look in the mirror, I don't say, you've had cancer. He's changed my life that much.
But so many people need this.
And I'm truly grateful to you.
This is a part of their love story. It's a big part of their life.
It's not an easy question to respond to when people say, so what kind of work do you do? Brian pretty much avoids it.
I avoid it.
So this is what my dad does.
But to get onto your latest project, and as I said at the beginning, I don't know if I actually said what it was called, but it's called Mum and Dad's Nipple Factory.
That's right.
And I was like, okay, this is interesting. What's this about? But this, as I said before, it's an incredible documentary, and I'm so intrigued to hear like how this came about. I mean, obviously the director is essentially, it's about his family. Did he approach you? How did this come to your door?
Yeah, so Mom and Dad's Nipple Factory was brought to my company, which is SadCon Productions, and Haley Lisitsky-Weiser brought this to me, and she's like, you have to watch this. And I looked at the title and I thought, like, what is happening? What is this title? And obviously I was intrigued. And yeah, it's a documentary by Dustin, Superstar, that's what he goes by. And, he had been a filmmaker and a documentarian for many, many years, but he turned the camera on himself and his family. And his mother had breast cancer, and she had to have a mastectomy. And after the mastectomy, there was this issue that came up. So a lot of times the nipple cannot be spared. And so his mother was from his parents were like this conservative Christian family from the Midwest. But his father was an engineer, and he saw this as a problem that he needed to fix. And what the documentary is about is how Justin discovered that his parents had a secret nipple factory where they make prosthetic nipples for people who have had breast cancer in his sister's former bedroom. And it literally is a factory. Even like their local church community didn't know, it's not something they really talked about. But the documentary it's a very good documentary. There's a tremendous amount of footage that Justin and his dad took when they were kids and when they were, a family. So there's also just like great footage. And his dad is this very, very quiet, like barely speaks, engineer who literally was given a problem and solved it out of love for his wife. And so it really, we kind of say it's like a rom-com about a nipple factory. And they personally make and manufacture, nipples that specifically match a woman's shape, like all the things you think about that you want your body to look as close as possible to the way it did. And the documentary follows, kind of his parents' love story of how they came to be and how the cancer diagnosis challenged the whole family. He had sort of left the fold, left the religion, left the Midwest, and wanted to be the black sheep. And his parents kind of were able to keep him part of the fold. And this diagnosis, I mean, as Justin tells it took him like a month to even respond to his mom telling him that she had breast cancer. That's how distanced he was. And so the documentary is also about sort of, what does family look like? What does it look like when you have differences of opinion, which in an election year feels particularly appropriate to talk about? And, ultimately the documentary follows the clients that, that his parents reach with this incredible mom and dad nipple factory.
It's wonderfully done, and as you say, it's crazy how much footage there is. But it all makes sense when you watch it, because obviously the father videoed everything when they were kids, and then obviously the son then followed in those footsteps and filmed everything as well. There's such sweet characters, and yeah, it's a lovely documentary. I watched it with my partner, and she was welling up towards the end. Yeah, it's really emotional, but it's such a crazy story, and it's funny how the title, when you first read it, you go, what? And then when you watch, you're like, well, that is the only title that you can.
Exactly. It's literally about his mom and dad's nipple factory.
Once you've seen it. And with something like this, I mean, your production company as well, are you is there an aim? Is there something you're striving for? Because it feels like you've kind of had to go with everything. Is it just like when a project comes in, you're like, yeah, we'll give this one a go?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to, be interested in projects that are about strong women or women in general, women's health. That's kind of right up our alley. And there's a real strong geek factor to this. His dad's personality is very different, and that is, something that's really touching and I think really sweet about it. But, for us to executive produce it, I'm trained as a lactation educator counselor. So I interested in different aspects of women's health, but to me, it's sort of related in that, by us, producing this and trying to get it on, an Oscar list for documentary, like for us, it's a way of, giving notice, to documentaries about things like this, things about family, things about women, women's health, and also, kind of with a strong quirk factor.
Well, that's the thing that really kind of grabbed my attention as well. As you say, the father figure he's just not the kind of guy that you'd expect this to come from, and that brings it so much more. That relationship that they have, and yeah, no, it's just a beautiful thing. And obviously, breast cancer and cancer in general, you kind of feel like when you see a documentary like this, and you're like, is this going to be quite heavy? But it's done with a light of touch, and yeah, just so watchable. I want to I want there to be some sort of follow up. I want to see what the family are up to now. Do you know what I mean? It's they're very watchable, and I hadn't heard of his because he's got two names, Justin Johnson, but then
That's right,
Superstar.
Yeah, and that's sort of that's the name that he's produced and made films at for 20 some years. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Now, I feel like having seen this, I will be really looking out for him because it's beautifully put together. And is this something that you, in terms of documentaries and stuff like that, everything that you do seems to be kind of linked in terms of, mental health, and you're obviously with your podcast and all these things.
Yeah.
Is that something you're obviously like awareness and when you're looking for projects, looking to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot of projects that I've tried to get the rights to that other, people have gotten the rights to. So it's not that I haven't, tried my hand at a lot of different things, but, this was one that came to us, like I said, that just seemed to check off so many boxes of, things that are important to me and to our company. So, it just kind of felt like a slam dunk, but yeah, we, there tends to be a little bit of my personality, I guess, and a lot of the things I'm interested in. And as I mentioned, I'm in this Jim Jarmusch film, which should come out next year, Father, Mother, Sister, Brother. And, it's a lot about complicated families. And so I think that stuff is just sort of interesting to me.
Well, also that film that you've brought it up, I mean, the cast is insane.
It's insane.
Yeah,
not normal.
Blanchett, Adam Driver. I mean, crazy. That sounds like it's going to be really good. Is that?
Yeah, Tom Waits is in it. It's Charlotte Rampling. It's insane.
And obviously, in an acting capacity with that one, do you have is there something that you prefer over one over the other thing? I mean, obviously, writing, directing, producing, acting. Or is it just? I guess you've had it's a nice fruit salad of things that you've done here, so you kind of get to have.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a little bit like bloom where you're planted, I can't imagine, I couldn't imagine, directing someone else's writing, but also I know that it happens just because my experience was that I wrote something and then directed it. I think there's probably more in me, but just sort of balancing everything. And I also have, I have one kid going to college and one starting high school now. So life is also busy. But yeah, it really depends. I mean, the Jim Jarmusch thing was just phenomenal to be part of, and just to work with Adam Driver and Tom Waits and Jim, obviously. The movie's done in parts, so our part was just the three of us, and then the other parts are filmed separately.
Well, I look forward to that. And to sort of change the tack, and we'll have to wrap up soon, but thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. I want to ask, it's just really a tradition. We ask our guests, do you have any advice and because you tick so many boxes in terms of producing, directing, writing, acting, do you have any advice you would give to people trying to get into the film industry in whatever capacity?
Well, not to give your dad's advice, but it's a very difficult, the industry's in a very difficult place right now. And it's always been difficult, but it feels especially different right now. It feels like we're kind of in transition with, a tremendous influx of places to make content, which is amazing. But also there's still a lot of sort of, monopolies over the way things are made and how things are decided. So, I'm a firm believer that that creatives need to have an outlet. It's not like, oh, if it doesn't work out, go to law school, which, if you want to go to law school, that's fine. But I'm grateful for other ways that we find to be creative, even when our dream project doesn't happen. That can look like a lot of different things. It can look like a lot of different things. I think about, my younger one likes theater, and I see the unbelievable teachers who give their time, to teach kids. And I know they're actors, they're actors who might be waiting for something or waiting for the next thing. And there are so many other ways, that I'm so grateful that creatives are sharing their talents, even if it's not what we picture. And I think that's the thing too, is you always want more doors opening. And also you never know what's going to happen.
Most embarrassing moments, yeah.
There's one in particular. I had an audition for Chips Ahoy. I must have been 11 or 12. It was like before Beaches and before Blossom. And I was very new in the industry. And I remember that they played Michael Jackson's, I think it was Beat It. And they called you in 2 by 2, like they would call in 2 kids at a time.
Yeah.
And it's like horrifying.
You had to just like it's going to be horrifying.
It's horrifying. I mean, honestly, like it was more horrifying because I am who I am, like, and just because of the way I dealt with it. You were supposed to like dance or like whatever, and it was just like so awkward. Anyway, so yeah, so there's 1 camera and 2 of you, and I'm like doing my best, but I don't shine in those arenas. Like that's like if I don't like spontaneously dancing for the camera while Beat It is playing and I'm holding a Chips Ahoy cookie, it's not happening. And the camera very, very slowly just started to pan to her as I'm dancing. And I'm like over here dancing, and it's just panning. And it was clear that it became her audition, not mine. And I'll never forget it. And when I came home, I wrote in my journal about it, and I was so angry, and I was like, I hate this girl. I'm like, the poor kid, like she probably got the job, like good for her.
You never checked out and found out who got the job then?
Yeah, I don't want to know, but it was horrible.
That is horrendous. Classic though, classic. And the fact that you've carried it with you this long, it shows you how much.
Oh, it's never going away, that shame. Yeah.
I'm sure that must have come up on your podcast at some point. Deep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I hope people will check out Mom and Dad's Nipple Factory for sure.
Oh, I think once they hear the title, they'll be bang on that. But I really recommend it. It's a lovely documentary, as I said. And thank you so much for taking the time, and all the very best with it.
Thank you. Cheers. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you to our guest, Mayim, and thank you to her representation at Icon PR. As always, thank you to our sponsor, Betterhelp. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment. And if you have any suggestions for future guests or any questions about the episode, put it in the comments below. Thank you.